I never feel like a school teacher when I do that. I'm sorry. Welcome to this edition of the Literary and Scientific Society. So we will start off, as always, with private members' business. Does anyone have an issue that they've seen in the papers or anything this week that they'd like to see debated in the chamber? Anything that they'd like to start a conversation about? Anything at all? I think you said you had one, Mr. Spratt.
I would ask the Society what they make of Bob Dylan being awarded a Nobel Prize for Literature.
What indeed? Does anyone have an opinion on that? Yes, you, madam.
I don't know the official terms, so I'm sorry, but I think it's actually a great thing because Bob Dylan is not known for his singing ability. He's known for his words that speak to people. So anybody who has words that speak to people does deserve some form of recognition.
Fair.
And the fact that it's not arranged into stanzas and that, or into traditional poetry, it doesn't mean that it's not valid.
Fair enough. Does anyone have it? Would anyone like to respond to that? Tear down Bob Dylan. You would like to tear down Bob Dylan?
It's a pleasure. Well merited, but sets dangerous precedent.
Intriguing. Would anyone like to follow that train of thought or rebuke that train of thought? Anyone at all? Or does anyone have any other issue?
Next one.
Sorry?
I think M&M should get the next one.
I mean, you can make that an official motion if you want.
I don't think I shall.
Why not? Would you like to propose a phrasing to the motion then? This House would nominate M&M for a Nobel Peace. Definitely not Peace Prize. Would anyone like to add any addendums to that motion, or shall we just go to vote on that ludicrous motion? Does anyone like to second that motion? Sorry. I'm surprised at you. Okay, yeah, apparently. So we'll go to a vote on that motion. This House would give M&M a Nobel Prize in English literature. That's not biochemistry or anything like that. Would anyone like to vote in favour of that? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Would anyone like to vote against that? Say nay.
Nay!
Nice have it there.
That's
Move on.
yeah, more people. Any abstentions on that motion? You think it's utterly ludicrous? Okay, I think the nays have it there, so I'm not sure how I feel about that one. Anyone else have any other private members' business they'd like to put before the House? You, sir.
What do we think of the debate?
What, this debate?
No, the presidential debate.
Oh, right.
The last debate.
Anyone want to offer an opinion on that? Yourself, Mr. Bunting?
Oh, Harry, because play on this one.
I mean, you would say that.
Hillary won by default.
Yeah.
That's a
No, he's the Republican nominee. It's part of it.
Yourself, sir.
I think that with risk of dividing early before the debate started, I think it just proved once again that it is a choice of two evils. And yet again in the United States, and I think Bernie Sanders has been a far better nominee here.
A rising rage against the system, is that it? Yourself, Mr. Mercer?
Supplementary, do we think that today's video about Trump saying that he would date a 10-year-old in 10 years' time is going to be a presidential run ender, or can we do that?
Would anyone like to put forth their faith in humanity, the mental gates to it?
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Date a 10-year-old in 10 years' time, does that mean you'll be 20 at the time, which is legal?
Well, yeah, but he was saying because
It's still questionable.
he's implying.
But the idea is there now, he just needs to wait the 10 years to kind of...
No, it's not right. It's not right. Can we move on?
Yes, well,
Can I propose a motion to move on?
very well, then we'll move on to President's questions. Would anyone like to ask? No. Would anyone like to ask me any questions? Anything at all? Yourself, sir.
Will we ever return to the Senate room?
Next week, actually. It's been stolen from us by the party, i.e. the university, to do with it what they will. I'm not sure like that. Apparently the Orange Society have occupied it for a week. So,
Occupy.
Good choice of words.
oh God, oh my God. Does anyone have any other questions for me to give me another opportunity to thoroughly embarrass myself? Mr. Wheeler.
Mr. President, what did you have for breakfast?
I had a bagel with melted Gloucester red cheese on it. Don't you throw that word at me. Yes, so further attempts to embarrass myself. Anything else? Not to me. Actually, we'll move on from that. What do we have next? Oh yes, business. That ball and chain. So yeah, apparently we were doing an election tonight for the position of our external convener. I don't know if anyone has noticed, but there's a gaping hole in our council that needs to be filled by someone. We are going to be voting tonight on that position. There is precisely one candidate to include Ron reopen nominations. So because there's only one candidate, we're going to sort of quicken up the process and just do a vote by hand. So before I do that, I'd like to welcome the candidate to the floor, Mr. Ryan Neal, to give a 1-minute pitch on why he thinks he's the best person out of all the other people running for the position.
Well, I'm quite surprised I'm the only candidate. As far as I'm aware, there's like 5 others initially. It's a shame Richie pulled out, could have been interesting. But anyway, yes, pitch starting now. I am Assistant Administrator of Victim Support. I deal with a lot of organisational things, a lot of confidential, sensitive information. So being on point, being logical, and being organised is very important to my job. Past that, in dealing with large groups of people, I have been a STEMnet ambassador, teaching computer science to kids. BBC made digital campaigns the last time I was doing that was in 2015. And it involved me having to deal with large numbers of people, process all ages from, I think, 6 and even 18. Some Belfast Met people were there as well, so I was older. But generally speaking, a wealth of organisational information and in dealing with clients both here nationally and internationally in terms of purchase orders. So that's my pitch in a minute, I guess.
Thanks for that, Mr. Neal. Yes, would anyone like to pose any questions to the candidates? Please give him a harder job than this. Please, somebody. You, sir.
Yes. What do you think of your opponents?
Vacuous, void of any and all points.
I was waiting for you to say that if you were in office, they'd be in jail or something.
Maybe they are in jail.
That's why they're not balancing, Richie.
I may or may not have eliminated the competition. I shall not concur.
Right, on that note, I mean, if there's no other questions, I suppose we'll move to a vote. All in favour of the candidate with amazing levels of democratic legitimacy from Parliament, say aye. Aye. That's not, I'm just registering you. I'm not actually voting, I'm not allowed to. All against the person, say nay.
Nay.
Anyone who's really not happy with this set of circumstances at all and doesn't want to vote on the motion, say nah. Fair? Okay, then I believe that welcome aboard the council, Mr. Neal, as our new external convener. Anyway, enough hogging the limelight. Yes, and then the next announcement is we had interviews for our first year representative on Monday when nominations closed, and through a very long, diligent process that lasted literally several hours, we chose a candidate for the role of first year representative, and he is sitting here before us. His name is Mr. Matthew Bryson. I'd like to welcome you to the council as well. And on that note, I will hand over to my colleague, Mr. Rob Whitehurst, to read the minutes of the last debate, which was, I've totally forgotten. This house would declassify transgenderism as a mental health disorder. So welcome to the board.
Good evening, everyone. I hope we are all well. The third ordinary meeting of the Literary and Scientific Society at Queen's University, Belfast took place on the 6th of October and was attended by 46 members. Private members' business was heard from Mr. Johnny Finlay, who wished to congratulate President Murphy on a successful start to his term, as well as his ability to stay in position of power longer than former UKIP leader Diane James. Amidst some confusion as to the identity of the MEP for South East England, Mr. Finlay called for the motion of "This House does not know who Diane James is." In a proud display of the House's knowledge of non-consequential politicians, the motion was defeated. Technology Officer Chris Spratt then asked the House if a citizen of the world really was a citizen of nowhere, in reference to the comments made by Prime Minister Theresa May in midweek. While some members of the House protested, Mr. Finlay urged that on this occasion we should all bow to Chairman May. In further UKIP business, Mr. Whitehurst asked the President to wish Stephen Wolfe a full recovery from his injury as a result of some spicy lad EU banter chat that escalated. This culminated in the motion, "This House would send Stephen Wolfe a bouquet of white lilies," which tragically did not pass. President's questions were heard from Rachel Ireland, Chris Spratt and Ryan Neal, all concerning constitutional matters, before Mr. Finlay finally asked President Murphy what he had for breakfast. Making a break from his previous answers of kebab pizza, Chipco and an egg sandwich at 4 p.m, Mr. Murphy announced that his breakfast that morning consisted of eggs and bacon. Without further ado, Mr. President then announced the evening's motion. This House believes transgenderism should no longer be considered a psychological disorder. Opening for the proposition was Rachel Ireland, who began by stating the OED definition of gender, which is a category to which one is assigned by self or others, before going on to define mental illness as a disease of the brain, mind or personality. She claimed that one's identity and personality is decided by them and them alone, whereas no individual has control over disease and mental illness. She claimed that to tell trans people that there is something wrong with them and that they have a disorder is not the right way to go about getting effective help or ensuring a healthy state of being. She concluded that this was a problem which must be solved rather than combated. Opening the opposition was Mr. Ryan Neal, who claimed that the proposition was taking a social view of the motion rather than a medical one which was needed. He defined a disorder as a significant clinical disturbance that reflects a dysfunction, before going on to clarify that transgenderism itself isn't classified as a disorder, but gender dysphoria is. He rallied against the proposition for being reckless in their advice, stating that a response in a diagnostic setting and tone of a doctor was the best way to help people who are suffering from gender dysphoria. He concluded by using an autism diagnosis as an example of where sufferers aren't told that they are in any way wrong or less of a person, but rather as clinical confirmation that they will face difficulty in their lives. Concluding for the proposition was main speaker Mr. Phelan Hook. He opened by drawing a distinction between psychological and neurological issues and commented that dysphoria didn't necessarily mean discomfort. He asserted that at the end of the day it was a case of doing what was best to ensure that someone does not feel in any way hindered or in a position of illness due to their condition. He concluded by saying that labelling one with the title of disordered is incredibly harmful and only leads to individuals being pigeonholed. Concluding for the opposition and so the debate was Mr. Johnny Finlay, who wished to make it clear that classifying someone as disordered did not necessarily mean that that person should be looked down upon. He claimed that in the proposition's view of disorder being an offensive and belittling label, individuals suffering with disorders such as depression and schizophrenia would somehow be looked upon as lesser because of their situation. He concluded by asking the House what message this would send to sufferers of mental health, and asserted that merely making transgenderism a social phenomenon rather than a medical and clinical one would be letting down many who require assistance. Questions were heard from Ashley Kane, Schieffer Dixon, Sam, Emma, and former Green Party candidate for West Belfast, Ellen Murray. A vote was taken based on House opinion prior to the debate, which read 23 ayes, 1 nay and 15 abstentions, and finally a casting vote based on Speaker's performance was taken, which read 4 ayes, 30 nays and 10 abstentions. May I take the minutes as read?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And on a lighter note, I'd say a lighter note, the refugee crisis, I was about to say the The motion this evening is this House believes that European states have a moral duty to accept refugees. This motion is co-hosted with the Amnesty Society, both in Northern Ireland and here at QUB. and to sort of fill you in on the sort of the context of this debate and the role of Amnesty in that, I welcome our chair for this evening, Ms. Manila Gray.
Okay, well, hello. I'd like to thank you for inviting me in lieu of anyone terribly important from the office. So I've been involved with Amnesty back when I was at Queen's myself, and subsequently I've been doing work with them for about the last year in the office. So I've followed refugee issues in Northern Ireland and more widely, as I think we all have, for a while now. So I'm going to just say that I'm looking forward to hearing all your points on what is a particularly interesting motion in its phrasing, that states have a moral duty to accept refugees. I think that that's probably a bit tougher than a legal duty, but I'm not going to express any bias. So first of all, the wider context, which again figures that I'm sure a few of you are going to bring up. It's estimated that there are around 60 million displaced people all over the world at this point, which Amnesty, amongst others, claim, with or without reason, is the highest number since World War II. And displaced persons might include people that are internally displaced within their own states. So the UN have said that there are around 21 million refugees, but only 14% of those are present in countries where the GDP would be in the upper quartile worldwide. So rich countries, for want of a better phrase, are sort of, in terms of numbers, they're doing a bit, but it's very much open for debate as to whether they should be doing more. That's my point. So Amnesty's approach to the international crisis would be to take a sort of case-by-case approach, and then also to approach summits like the Global Refugee Summit that we saw last month. Amnesty weren't terribly pleased with it because there is a lack of outcome at summits, is the general consensus among agencies that are working with refugees, and that lack of outcome may or may not present a moral ambiguity. So Syria, obviously, Amnesty have been lobbying on that. We got 5 million of the 60 million displaced people, or 5 million of the 21 million refugees are Syrians, and that has been brought up with the UK government time and again. They made commitments last year, which, in retrospect, they're still woefully behind on those commitments. Amnesty already do have issues with the UK government's commitments to do things, and then they're not having followed up on it. So quite aside from a legal sort of argument, you've got the moral argument of politicians making commitments. So I look forward to hearing about that from all of you, and also I assume that we might hear some things about detention, forced destitution, and healthcare issues. So on that note, I'll pass it over to the proposers.
And with that, we welcome the first speaker, Mr. Robert Mercer.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much to Liverific and of course to Amnesty for hosting this very important and of course topical debate. As the kind of as someone introducing the motion, I think it's important that we get our definitions correct. Refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, these are words that are often used interchangeably, although there are differences. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, refugees are people fleeing conflict or persecution, a person who is forced to leave their country of origin and seek protection in another country because of a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. They are defined and protected in international law and must not be expelled or returned to situations where their life and freedom are at risk. I did say there about international law, and I know that this debate, as quite rightly pointed out by Fionnuala, is about international, or it's about a moral duty rather than the legal kind of obligation. I do think it's important though that we talk about the international kind of law. At the root of that is obviously a moral obligation. Laws do not just make themselves. There has to be a moral aspect to those laws. Also, let's talk about this idea of morality. I don't think we want to get into debate about kind of moral theories. You know, if you want to go into Hobbes and Immanuel Kant about different theories of morality, I don't think we want to do that. So I think what we're basically saying on this side of the House is that we believe that it is right that European states accept refugees, and I'll go on to talk a bit more about that now. As pointed out by Fionnuala, there are 21 million refugees across the world. I'd like to focus specifically on Syria, although it is important that we mention there are other countries such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, Albania, Pakistan, Eritrea, Nigeria, Iran and Ukraine, to name but a few. But I will focus on the Syrian refugee crisis because I do think it is important. It is why we are debating this issue. The refugee crisis, so to speak, as it's been formed in the mainstream press, is a kind of recent development. But the fact that Western countries haven't accepted their fair share of refugees is not a new thing. Again, the idea of Pakistan, Eritrea, all those, Albania, Kosovo, this has been going on for years. Okay, so this is not a new thing. But with Syria, with the crisis in Syria getting worse and worse, it has been highlighted more so now than ever. And as rightly pointed out, we are facing probably one of the worst humanitarian, if not the worst humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. There are about 4.8 million refugees from Syria who have left Syria, fleeing war and persecution. Since the civil war started in Syria, about 386,000 people have been killed. 386,000 people have been killed. Of that 386,000, 14,000 are children. 14,000 children killed in the Syrian civil war. Think about that for a second. These are children who will never have the same opportunities, the same life that we have. Lives cut far too short. According to Dr. Christine Latif, who's a World Vision response manager for Turkey and Northern Syria, she said the children of Syria have experienced more hardship, devastation and violence than any child should have to in 1,000 lifetimes.
On that point.
No. We have all, I'm sure, been left heartbroken at the pictures of young children looking aimlessly at camera lenses after their homes, their livelihoods, their families have been destroyed. And I'm sure we've all seen the photographs of Aleppo and Damascus and other cities completely torn apart with no infrastructure and no hope. Although it seems that these photographs are not new, and we have been seeing these photographs for a long time in the Middle East, and compassion fatigue probably has set in, it is important that we look at these photographs and we think about the people behind these photographs. When we see the rubble in Aleppo and Damascus and Homs, that we see these are people's lives, people's livelihoods. Also, let's think about the people who are fleeing this. Fleeing this destitution. These are amongst the most destitute people in the world. And as rightly pointed out, we have only accepted 0.21% of the British population are refugees. Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt and Iraq have all accepted about 4.8 million refugees. Europe has accepted 1 million. In a population of 500 million people, we've accepted less than 1 million refugees. It's ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And just recently, Donald Tusk, EU President, said that Europe is close to the limit on refugee numbers. Let's be very clear that this is a response to the rise of the far right in Europe. We've seen a U-turn from German Chancellor Angela Merkel on the amount of refugees being let into Germany. This is a response to the alternative for Deutschland. We've seen that Britain has not lived up to what it should have because of the rise of UKIP and far right-wing populist parties. As seen in France and François Hollande with the Front National. Today the French government saying that they're going to close the Calais jungle as it is known. This is a response to the rise of far-right fascist groups in Europe. This is not a case that we don't have enough room. It's a case that there is not the political will to achieve this.
On that point,
Go on, why not?
Yeah, the political will isn't there because the politicians are there to rule the public that they have, and they know that if they start taking in an absolute ton of refugees, that it's not great for social cohesion. You're creating a scenario in which those refugees will be discriminated against and possibly attacked, just like they have in this country. So shouldn't the politicians think about the pragmatic solutions rather than just your sentiments?
Well, no, I actually think on that point, when you talk about social cohesion and integration, that surely the government should do more to help social cohesion and integration. That is not a reason not to accept these people. And these people are fleeing war and persecution. To say that because of this problem of social cohesion that we shouldn't bring them in, I think that's a cop-out. And the government, it's not a case of just bringing these people in and leave them there. It is about integrating them into society. It's about giving them a chance and a hand up. No, because I've not got long left. I think that but I want to just say my last point before I give up the floor is that the key aspect of this debate is that those fleeing war and persecution, they may have a different skin colour, they may have a different language, or they may worship a different god, but they are no different than any of us. Call me an extremist, but I ask the question, why is I, as a 21-year-old white male here in Belfast, why do I have a right to a more prosperous life than someone in Syria or Eritrea or Somalia or whatever it is? This is a debate about equality, make no bones about that. And when people are fleeing their homes and livelihoods in search of not just a better life, it's not a case of they're just searching for a better life. It's a case of if they stay, they may not survive. So I say that we have to not just look after our own, but we have to open our hearts and open our borders to people fleeing persecution and conflict. And I am very proud to commend this motion to the House.
Thank you very much for that very impassioned speech, Mr. Murtagh. And now we give way to the floor. The first speaker for the opposition, Mr. Ajay Mirakur.
I would look at two main strands in the course of my argument, and there's no way I can, there's no way I can match the energy of our colleague here. So I'm afraid you'll just have to listen to me. The first strand is to what extent are we actually helping these people by taking them in? We've taken these refugees and rescued them from persecution and a brutal civil war, and now what? I just don't understand what the long-term plan is for these people, and in this speech I'll focus on the ones that Northern Ireland has taken. Again, looking at the refugees that we've taken from Syria, what are we doing with them? Are we temporarily keeping them out of harm's way so that they can eventually go back to Syria and help rebuild their country once the war is over? Goodness knows when that is going to be. Or will they be permanently integrated into the fabric of our community? And how are we going to help them do this to become part of society? Getting a job, for example, is difficult enough for local people. Never mind for these people many of whom don't have qualifications that we would recognise. Many of whom may not even be able to speak the language. What is life going to be like in the long term for those who don't get into employment or education, who end up not having a purpose to their lives, who end up with no means of supporting themselves or their families?
On that point, sir?
Go ahead.
Is it not better than death?
I'm coming to that. That is, it's a very valid point, but the situation that I've described is one that I've been in myself, and trust me, I'd rather have been dead than been in that situation. I know what it's like to live like that, and there's a good chance that we're going to simply end up replacing one form of hell with another. Taking refugees seems to me to have been done seems to be done without any real forethought or any real kind of long-term planning. And why is it that the European states are taking all the heat? Remember, this motion is that the House believes that European states have moral duty. Why has nobody called upon the United States to take people? They go, why even to airlift people if necessary? I haven't heard that. What about the rich Arab and Gulf states? I know some of them have, but the Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. How many people have they taken in? And who's putting pressure on them to take people who are geographically much closer?
On that point, sir.
Go ahead.
There's 10 countries in the world that host more, that account for 2.5% of the world's GDP, and they host more than 80% of the world's refugees. So although I agree that more countries in the Middle East should be doing their part, isn't our responsibility to look at our closest neighbours and ask what they're doing?
Okay, I hear you. The second strand of my argument, and many of you aren't going to like what I've got to hear. It's not right to talk about moral duties because I think the moral approach to this debate has completely lost perspective. There's a sickening hypocrisy behind some of the moral indignation directed at those who would limit the intake of refugees. I remember when the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, stood up in Scottish Parliament last year and attacked, quote unquote, the walk-on-by attitude of the UK government, and described how the images of the dead body of the child, Alan Kurdi, brought tears to her eyes. And soon after that, politicians, actors and other celebrities were queuing up to call on the UK and other European countries to take in more and more refugees. It became the cool thing, the fashionable thing to do. It's good PR. It's a good spin. Basically what they're saying is, look at what wonderful people we are. Aren't we so generous and kind-hearted and compassionate? Well, no thank you. Well, the reality is, that's not what we are. No thank you. Our society is rotten to the core. We are selfish and mean-spirited, and we treat our fellow men and women and children in our country, in our own society, like dirt, like absolute dirt. No thank you, no thank you. You only have to turn on the news to see that. We use this illusion, and to me it sometimes feels like a delusion. We use this illusion of being open and welcoming to refugees so that we can feel morally superior to everybody else. In fact, no, it's worse than that. I've actually used it as a stick to beat people with. The Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, was savaged on Twitter merely for saying his country could not cope with the sheer magnitude of the refugee influx. And it feels like, and I must be clear, this is with reference to the emotional reaction to the refugee crisis rather than the refugees themselves. It feels like any challenge to the orthodoxy of taking more refugees cannot be tolerated and has to be crushed as brutally as possible. Also, it's not quite all as it seems. When a group of refugees at the Hungarian-Croatian border were told they couldn't go to the European country of their choice, they started rioting. If a group of young men in Northern Ireland started doing that, we'd be going, tut tut, isn't that disgraceful? There are scenes where women were literally throwing their children like a football over a border fence. If a Northern Irish woman did that with her child, the police and social services would be on her like a shot. And yet with refugees, we say, oh, it's simply a reflection of the horrors and traumas that they've been through. I submit that our moral assessment of this situation is grossly distorted. Thank you.
Mr. America, can I get another round of applause for our maiden speaker this evening? Secretary of Proposition, Mr. Jason Butler, on the board.
Well, good evening, Chairperson, fellow debaters, esteemed opposition and audience. It's a pleasure to be here, and once again just want to make clear my thanks to their effort for their collaboration on this event with Amnesty QB and Amnesty Wider. I'm here tonight to explain why Amnesty QB in particular believes that European nations have a moral duty to take in refugees, and why we believe that Britain's current plan is setting itself on the wrong side of history and condemning desperate people to fend for themselves outside Fortress Europe. So, to be honest, I would have thought that there's broad agreement on this topic. On a purely human level, when you have people fleeing a brutal civil war, a horrific dictator like Assad, barrel bombs, chemical weapons and more, and when many of them are children who have lost everything, they've lost their family, their friends, their school, their houses, I would have thought it's only natural to admit that we have a moral duty to help these people, as we have throughout history, when we have. But yeah, so I would have thought that European nations' moral duty was clear and present and evident. After all, this is the worst humanitarian crisis of our lifetime. And the previous speaker, I just wanted to mention this, talks about a long-term plan for these people. These people have no long-term if we don't help them. There's the uncertainty in wartime about planning for these people's lives is no excuse not to be compassionate and help them. I'm sorry there seems to just be such little faith in humanity in the previous team. And I also feel the need. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it is important to at least lay out some semblance of a plan. I mean, I read yesterday the German government's already spent £600 billion debt that not only will this generation's children be paying, their children's children will realistically still be paying off that debt. And if that physical burden grows, everyone's going to be left out of the moral equation here. So.
I agree that there does need to be a plan, but I mean, at the end of the day, if someone's house is on fire and they come to your door, you let them in, you don't ask, well, what's your long-term plan for getting your house back in order? I would also say that when it comes to the debt and the money that my tax stars, when I get the tax, are going to have to pay, then I'm very happy to pay that. That's compassion. We called it a compassion tax. I would be very happy in paying it. So after all, yes, this is the worst humanitarian crisis of our lifetimes. 11 million Syrians have been killed, forced to flee their country. And this doesn't include the destitution, human trafficking that all these people go through when they're both getting here and when they arrive here. So people are crying out for our help, and when most of us would help a friend or indeed actually a stranger in need, why would we not help these people just because they're from a different part of the world? Go ahead.
I have to admit that my experience of life is that most of us wouldn't help people around us. So I appreciate most of the people here don't share that point of view, but I'm just...
Yeah, I take that point, and that is just a different, probably ideological point, but I mean, I just have basic faith in humanity. I think, if one of your friends or one of your strangers, someone stood up in this room and said I have a problem, most people's natural reaction would be, how can I help that person? And that's what Amnesty tries to do, and that's what activism tries to do for myself as well. So people are crying out for our help. Unfortunately, in this divided political climate, while it isn't a politically convenient position to help refugees right now, as Robert mentioned with the far right, because of this, few politicians have had the courage to actually act like leaders in this crisis. So why do we have a moral duty to help those people? It's not an understatement to say that European nations have completely failed, and just not right now, sorry, in their responsibilities towards their neighbours. We all have moral responsibilities to help those less fortunate than ourselves, and having those 10 developing countries hosting more than 80% of the world's refugees is a disgrace. That's something we're going to be ashamed of in the future. An argument I hear sometimes is we don't have the space, we're already so generous to asylum seekers, and that's not true. Refugees make up only 0.18% of the total population of Britain right now. It's a couple of 100,000 people, and only about 40% of applications for refugee status are actually granted in Britain. So it's not an easy country to get refugee status in. So anybody who says that you don't have the space doesn't understand the crisis that these people are facing. By ignoring appeals for humanitarian aid and leaving refugees stranded in Calais like this, we've left UN agencies unable to cope with the sheer numbers and unable to provide the basic requirements for people fleeing war and persecution. We've seen other countries like Canada, by the way, resettling about 30,000 in the past year. We were resettling 20,000 in the next 4 years. So is this not a moral outrage that I would suggest that we're shirking our responsibilities to the world?
On that point.
Yeah.
You say that we have that moral obligation to help people. Nations like the UK and France are continuing repeated airstrikes on Syria, is there not a hypocrisy to say we have a moral obligation to help people whose homes we're destroying?
I mean, that would be part of my point, to be honest. I'm not standing up here defending airstrikes by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, so I think this is just another reason why we should take people in. We're the ones that are making the mess in the Middle East. We're the ones that should help the people that are fleeing. And as Robert pointed out, I think it's really important as well to not see these people just like numbers, or like numbers in a paper run by Murdoch, or on a poster behind Farage in an election campaign. That kind of talk isn't worthy of a nation who wants to lead in the world like the UK, I hope, does. Don't we want to live in a country which can defend its fair-minded, open, tolerant, one which looks after its neighbours and cares for the most vulnerable among us? And as you rightly pointed out, we made a mess in the Middle East. Many of ISIS's leaders are members of the army that the IS disbanded after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. We left a vacuum when we had no plan to what to do after regime change. And what happened to the spirit of tolerance and cooperation in Europe? After World War II, we were so ready to help and set up so many organisations, and now it's just disappeared. It seems like it only refers to people that are like us, or that we can see. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just our moral duty to help refugees, it is actually a moral outrage if we don't. If we don't recognise our moral duty to help refugees, we will be on the wrong side of history. Fortress Europe is an embarrassment now and in the future, and we should help people who come to our shores in desperation, persecution or fear, just as we would want to be treated. If the tables were turned someday. And I'd just like to leave you with something that happened today at the Amnesty QB demonstration in front of the Landing Building. A guy actually came up to us who was a refugee from Turkey, and he said that he wouldn't sign our petition or help us or support us because he was so let down by the government. He's homeless right now. And I just wanted to point out that that's the legacy we're leaving if we keep going with the policy of not accepting people, not integrating them into our communities. So this is the legacy that we're leaving with our approach, with the history books, and to our children. We must change the attitudes of some parts of the population and some of the policies of our government. I strongly encourage the House to support the motion that European nations have a moral duty to accept refugees. Thank you very much.
And this House now welcomes the external convener elect to the floor, and I'm going to run behind you really rudely and grab water at the same time.
I'd like to make a point that's not my full name. You want to make that point? Yeah, I'm back. Third week in a row. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned about being in the wrong side of history, you know, in our moral duty. Well, I'm going to look at what history actually says about our track record for our moral duty, and then see what that says, for instance. So let's examine the moral hazard of our moral duty. We had a moral duty, right, as a Labour government, in taking down Saddam Hussein, and I think you briefly mentioned that. We went in, we basically torched most of their country's infrastructure. We didn't have a plan after we had him executed, so we left a power vacuum. Extremist groups vied to fill that power vacuum, and as such the biggest, baddest, cruelest, the one who was willing to do whatever was necessary in order to win, won, because that's the way of the world. And that became Daesh, which of course was the seeds of ISIS. We also had moral duty in Libya, where Gaddafi was using tanks to put down protests. Well, in part of that, we armed rebels who were anti the West. We gave them officers who trained them on how to best deal with the military. And that all resulted in, came to a point where Gaddafi was sodomized with a knife in a sewer pipe. Sodomized with a knife in a sewer pipe in a ditch. And a video was taken of that. Justice. That's not the justice I stand for. Then Syria. We had a moral duty in Syria, and that seems to be the most pertinent issue. So we thought we learned from the previous issues, but our moral duty in that case came to sending weapons into an already incredibly unstable situation, which added further fuel to the fire, which left it so unstable that it left it weak. It left it weak to ISIS expansion. So let's take account of what's happened. We sowed the seeds of ISIS in Iraq with our sense of moral duty. We armed them to the teeth with our sense of moral duty in Libya, and then we created instability which allowed for their expansion in Syria. Go team. Well done in our moral duty. And now we're left with a crisis that is the which is the legacy of this moral duty, and now we're talking about it again. Nor aren't they, but the definition of man is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I am sick to death of hearing this rhetoric. Go ahead.
Just on that point, surely taking in refugees is not doing the same thing as sending people.
I'm getting that point. Thanks for that. Well, it's important to set up the context because we're sort of looking at this through a sort of blinkered view here. You know, we're seeing this humanitarian crisis and going, oh, woe is the world. And yes, it is a terrible, terrible thing. But it is incredibly unwise to forget to analyse the source of this and how this came about. And what I want to tackle here is just the insanity that it is to take these same concepts, these same moralising opinions, and this self-righteous, sanctimonious arrogance that you somehow have a monopoly of morality in saying that, you know what, which is the policy of the left thus far, particularly in most regressive policies we seem to be seeing today. No thanks. It has undermined national and international law, refusing to acknowledge the procedures in place for asylum seekers, and the likes of Angela Merkel, to have the gall to stand up and say, Europe's doors are open, big neon sign saying, come here, we all want you. On what democratic mandate did she make that decision? On what democratic mandate? She had no place to talk for the entire EU or any European country at that point. She made a promise she couldn't keep and can't keep and hasn't kept, and is now a hypocrite in pulling back her policies on that, and her popularity rating is a 5-year low. I would be surprised, in fact, I would be surprised if she gets elected again, although the AfD are 20 points behind, so hey, who knows. Really, the point I want to make here is just the short-sightedness of it. The real short-sightedness of just not thinking it through, not having a plan. We see a child's body wash up in a child's corpse wash up on a beach in Greece. No thanks. And that made it real for a lot of people, right? People in their Starbucks ivory towers drinking their skim milk frappuccinos, delving into their horoscopes. All of a sudden, I was like, wow, the world's a terrible place at the moment. Well, it was already a terrible place. Look at Yemen. You know what I mean? Look at all the starvation that's happening there since 2014, and we're only hearing about this now. I mean, when you have this naive mindset of we're going to heal the world, we're going to fix it all, we don't have the ability to do that. It's a world of finite resources. You can't just tackle all the problems. You're my team. You can't just tackle all. You can't just tackle all the world's problems yourself. It's incredibly naive, and because of its short-sightedness, it's been incredibly destructive thus far. So I want to raise a sort of moral, parable, maybe at this moment in time, my own. So imagine you have a road, right? And on each side of the road, you have a pavement. And there's a beggar on the left side of the pavement, beggar on the right. And you, being, say, an affluent student, happen to be walking along the left-hand side of the path, and you see this beggar. And you see that he wants for so much, and you want for nothing. And you lament the state of the world with a very soft heart. And you walk up to him, and while stuffed with cash, you hand him, say, 1,000 quid, right? Hypothetically. And he takes that. And he's so thankful. His eyes well up with tears at just this opportunity he's been given. And all of a sudden now all his hopes and dreams are possible. And the student walks away thinking that he's done something great. Meanwhile, on the right hand side of the street, you have the elder beggar. And he sees what the elder beggar on the left hand of the street has just been given. And he's jealous. He sees that and he goes, well, how did he earn that? I picked this spot, I get a better tip than him. Who's he to suddenly just get this? And so he follows him as he goes away, getting the left, wherever, maybe to get a haircut. Takes him into an alleyway, smashes his head off the wall, digs greedily into his pocket, takes out 1,000 quid and whatever he picked up that day. Meanwhile, the student's still sitting there in his lecture theatre, with his mates, getting congratulated for his charity. But let me just point out that everyone in this situation, as a result of that, has lost something. The student has lost the perspective of the situation. He thought he's done something good. But what he's done is he's given the most cruelest gift you can give, and that is the gift of false hope. The guy who had the money, well, he is back to square one, but he's even less back to square one. His expectations have been dashed. And of course, the guy on the right-hand side of the road has lost his innocence and possibly his liberty as a result. Now, of course, this is an absurd situation, right? It is an absurdity. But I want to point out that moral actions with good intentions can have unexpected and devastating consequences. And I ask you to think this through and be careful in your approach to this, rather than just saying this moral duty, which history shows has been a moral hazard. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Neal, that reality check. We welcome the third speaker from the proposition, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And first, I'd like to apologise for my lateness. Unfortunately, our printer wasn't working, so at about 5 to 7, I was rushing around, texting and asking if any of them could help, and thankfully did in the last minute. But
here.
So, I'd like to begin with what I believe is, I know it is about the moral argument for accepting refugees, but I do think that the legal argument is important too, and I think that they are inevitably interconnected. We've seen after World War II, international human rights have all become the norm, and that has certainly changed people's attitudes in terms of refugees and other things. So first of all, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14 says, everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. And the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, Article 1, says that anyone who is unable to avail themselves of the protection of their country, or who is unwilling, or who are unable, to return to it, should avail of such protection. And I certainly believe that if we look at Syria and Iraq and other countries, definitely those two circumstances are fulfilled. I feel there is also an important precedent, and people have talked about how this is the biggest refugee crisis since World War II, but we only need to look at World War II and see how Europe has frankly failed to help Jewish refugees there. In 1938 there was the Kinder Transport, in which the UK took 100,000 unaccompanied children. That was after a lot of pressure from certain individuals, and the government was still very reluctant to help. Unfortunately, as we know, no other European country could help because they were subsequently occupied by the Nazis, and we all know the horrific consequences of that. Interestingly enough, actually, one of the few places of refuge was actually the Middle East. There were refugees from southern Europe, particularly Greece and Italy, who fled to camps in Palestine, Egypt, and Syria especially. The biggest one was actually in Aleppo, so there is a strange sort of contrast there. Even if we look at the 10,000 in the Kinder Transport, is still, we've got at the moment the UK government committing to 20,000 in the next 4 years, which is certainly far too low. So the current estimate from the UNHCR is that there are 4.8 million refugees in the world. That was as of March 2016, so it's probably risen from that. Oh, Syrian refugees, not refugees as a whole. Over the course of 2015, there were over 1 million refugees who arrived on European shores by boat. 37,000 of those have disappeared and are presumed to be dead, I imagine, which is nothing short of a disgrace on Europe's behalf. It is probably also worth noting that many of the problems in the Middle East actually, you could argue, are Europe's fault. They stem back to during the First World War, when the British and French empires basically split the various countries between them. So, for example, France took Syria and Iraq and a few others, the UK took Palestine, Arabia and a few others, and they weren't very good in terms of providing for the various ethnic groups. The Kurds, for example, are completely ignored.
On that point?
Yep.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Sykes-Picot, because that does tend to reappear in contemporary Middle Eastern politics. However, it's unfair to tie that legacy back to Europe. For the reason being, due to the unique dynamics involved in the Middle East, it's impossible to distribute ethnic minorities within a line without the countries as a picture being completely unviable due to overlapping borders. But you mentioned specifically the legal precedent on which the refugee system is based, namely the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the Dublin Accords. However, it's commonly assumed now, at least within the international community, that said agreements are left to the wayside of history ever since the de facto opening of the borders with Italy and Greece towards the rest of the world. But yeah, how would you build an effective agreement off what's already agreed?
Well, on your second point regarding the Dublin regulation, I'm actually going to get on that in a minute, but certainly regarding as I said, the agreement that split up the Middle East, I do think obviously it was a completely different situation. It was still the era of colonialism, but nonetheless, there are obviously many other factors. There's the rise of various extremists in Iran and other countries is certainly something later on. We saw the Iranian Revolution and the Soviets invading Afghanistan. There are all sorts of reasons, but that was certainly the first one. So, between April 2011 and August 2016, the number of Syrian asylum applications to the UK was just over 10,000. In Ireland, it was only 224. This can be effectively contrasted with Turkey, who has accepted, as of February 2016, 2.8 million refugees, or Lebanon, just over 1 million, or Jordan, 600,000. Yep.
As you talk about then our moral obligation to take in these numbers, Germany, for example, opened up its borders and took in hundreds of thousands of refugees, which included gangs of murderers and rapists who pillaged the streets of Berlin. Do you think we have a moral obligation for those sorts of people who are no doubt to be included within large quantities of refugees coming into nations?
Well, I would certainly support, background checks and stuff like that, but I think that would be completely unfair to assume that. You see, for example, the Paris and Brussels attacks, people said, Donald Trump and the like were saying, oh my god, look, these are, look, these immigrants or these refugees, we can't let them into our country when most of them are born in Paris or Brussels. So.
On that point, sir.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely reasonable to assume that if we bring in a large group of people who are ideologically linked, particularly to violent extremists of that ideology, do you not think that will provide a support network for extremism of which the Paris attacks, the Brussels attacks and these attacks would be reflective of? Do you think that's reasonable?
I can see your point, but I do feel that once again it is people here. There's a problem here in terms of people, certainly some movements feeling isolated, and people like ISIS being able to take control of that, but still feel it is unfortunately something of a generalisation. So I just have two brief points that I'll make. I think I'm in the last minute, but in regards to an EU-wide, we needed an EU-wide deal in order to deal with these certain problems. The Dublin regulations proved to be ineffective. The EU-Turkey deal, frankly, was disgraceful. It goes against the principle of non-refoulement from Article 33 of the 1951 Convention, and frankly, they've certainly failed on that. My final point is that we do need to confront the argument that refugees are, we need to confront the likes of the Daily Mail and stuff who are putting out this rhetoric, this disgraceful rhetoric. We can't forget that basically in the Daily Mail people were saying the exact same thing about Jewish refugees back in 1938. So certainly we have an obligation now to take care of and help as many refugees as possible. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that. In closing the argument for the opposition is Mr. Momusa.
Good evening, everyone. So, a little bit of a pre-warning. I only agreed to do this debate about an hour ago, so this is going to be absolute waffle from start to finish. But regardless, and I was really, really desperately hoping that you guys would give me a lot of points for rebuttal, but I've pretty much got a line and a half, so I'm going to have to go off the top of my head. See, their arguments were fantastic, and I really, on an emotional level, I agree with it across the board, but there's a difference between sentiment and pragmatism. So, what they proposed was kind of our typical we want to help, the fluffy notions, but what I would propose is real morality, is actually dealing with what is continuing, for example, the Syrian civil war, what kind of forces are propagating all of the conflicts across the region. So I'm not even just talking Syria. The same is happening in Libya, the same is happening in Iraq. There are the same forces all over the Middle East which have got a very direct ideology. And guess what? We support them. We explicitly support them. So we give them funding, we give them by means of aid, we sell them weapons, which they then go on to sell on to the groups that are creating this absolute havoc and mess. We are at loggerheads geopolitically with the supporters of Assad, which means that we cannot actually broker any kind of a peace deal. So it's fantastic. We can say we can bring in as many refugees as we like, but guess what? If you can't stop the channel of those refugees, then that is actually immoral. So we could, right now, cut the defence contracts that are feeding the weapons indirectly through to Syria. Where is the drive from the public to do this? Instead, we're suggesting that we will take a very small proportion, even if we wanted to take them all. Okay, we're talking about taking people away from their homes. Let's be absolutely clear here. Every single one of those refugees, these are not migrants. They are not economic migrants. They are refugees. They want to be living in their homes. So when instead of telling them that we're going to move them across the world to a place that they don't know, to a culture which often is different, to a language that is different, instead of trying to resolve the exact place where they want to be, that is the true moral question. How do we help those people get back to where they were?
Like, our team or Amnesty or anyone isn't opposed to a solution to Assad's crisis in Syria and other places, but the point is that there are people that are dying when they're flying themselves across the Mediterranean. Should we not just help the people that we can help and also pursue a geopolitical solution?
You're saying also as if it's being done. So we've had, how long has the Syrian civil war been there? It's been there since 2011, and we've continued to support the forces that are propagating the civil war. So that is actually that is the true thing that we should be focusing on before anything else, because we need to stop the cause of the refugees rather than necessarily just focusing on resolving the short-term issues. Go on then.
Thanks. You mentioned refugees by the very definition. They don't want to leave their homes. You know that they are seeking. They're not economic migrants. Surely, also by that definition, they don't want to leave their homes, but they have to. Is that not so?
Yeah, I'm not saying that we're literally forcing them to come over here. I understand that the idea is what I'm putting forward is that we should be focusing in terms of morality. The most moral thing would be to kind of try and help them restore the place that they're from and settle down from the civil war. Maybe later, Harry. Okay. Right. So the second point that I want to make, and this is again the pragmatism rather than the sentiment. If we look at the direction of travel politically across Europe at the moment, there is only one direction it's going towards. It is tending towards the right. We're seeing it not just in the Eastern European countries where we've seen just like overt Islamophobia and kind of borderline xenophobia, like kind of genocidal talk from certain parties there. We've got it here, we've got it in France, we've got a rise of race hate attacks across the continent. That might not be enough to stop to say that we shouldn't be taking in refugees yet, but it's about the direction of travel. And if you look at where we are politically, there are direct parallels with approximately 1934 Europe. Are we going to bring in these refugees into a climate in which they are going to be hated by, even in this country, you could probably go as far as to say 20 to 30% of the population would be overtly against these people to a kind of an aggressive degree. It's even worse across Europe. As this situation gets worse, you are effectively bringing them in to another side of the world after they've just escaped another war zone, rather than in a place where they have abject safety, which is the camps. We're bringing them into another place that is directly hostile against them, and that is the kind of thing which can breed actual kind of terrorist threats here, when you've gone from one kind of war zone to another place which is kind of which finds you repellent. That is where we actually have a security risk here, and we are not necessarily doing the people there the massive favours in the long term. What we should be looking at before anything else is trying to resolve and keeping the people and returning them from where they've been displaced, rather than bringing them to a place which is not accepting of refugees in general, and realistically, gone.
Like, these people are fleeing a war zone, so I admit that there is racism that exists in the UK, but all these people want is safety. They're not, admittedly, they might get like find it hard to get a job, but what they want is a safe place to live with their family, so we'd only have a moral responsibility to give them that.
Okay. I mean, if this early on we've had such an increase in race hate attacks, even here in the UK, let alone the rest of the continent, where you've seen, as I said, once again, far-right groups rising across the continent, just because they're safer here now than perhaps the refugee camps, doesn't mean they will be in 1 or 2 years' time. And 3, 4 years' time. And we are not doing anything to try and actually resolve the civil war. So we're almost kind of creating a situation where they're going to feel effectively trapped. Right. So I've got 15 seconds left. Can I just be clear? I don't hold any of these views. I find it.
Thank you for that. We will now go for 3 rounds of questions to both the opposition and then if you have any general questions on the motion. And then we'll have our closing remarks by our guest chair. So if anyone has a question for the proposition to begin with, Mr. Arnold back there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the House. My question is to the public. The second member of the proposition has said that he was not condoning airstrikes. But by an extension of his morality, which was essentially to appeal to save the children, is it not that by extension of his argument that he has to engage the final speaker of the opposition's point, that really what we need to be doing here is solving this war crisis that's hard? That in Syria there's displacement of 50% of the population, that if Syria continues to hemorrhage its population from its borders, we can't simply take that amount of people. It's just unfeasible for any country in the world to take on millions and millions of refugees. We also know that the Syria crisis will not be the last refugee crisis we'll face. Since 1945 we faced hundreds of them. We know that we can't continue just to take refugees on and on and on. So is it not that Amnesty should be focusing its efforts trying to rally for a geopolitical solution rather than just accepting more refugees?
Yeah, well I can understand why you feel like that, but basically what I would say to that is basically that Amnesty is not against a long-term solution and it's not against a geopolitical solution, but Amnesty's focus is also on those people that are dying while crossing the Mediterranean, that don't have anywhere to go, that are in a short-term solution as the Calais camps are. So yeah, we would probably be behind a geopolitical solution, but we're also behind compassion and actually helping the people that have no shelter, housing, place to live, yes, let's go.
No, it's only possible.
Anyone from the opposition like to respond to that?
I think that is an excellent point. And that is what we're actually doing. And we're being a lot more sophisticated and nuanced in our approach to this problem militarily than we have been in the past. Specifically, instead of bringing a hacksaw to surgery, we're bringing a scalpel. We're inputting special ops, SAS. They've been crippling ISIS's command from the inside, causing chaos in the ranks. It's part of the reason why the Jordanian military have been successful in taking back many cities. So yeah, that is demonstrably, by the evidence, the best way to go about this, rather than simply taking in indefinitely large numbers of people. So I think.
Thank you for that. Now, any questions to the opposition? Yourself, sir.
So, you say that yes, we can have a geopolitical solution that will be a very good long-term solution to this crisis. But there's still a short-term problem. If we don't take in these refugees, how exactly do you propose we deal with the refugee crisis?
Here we go.
Matthew Sullivan.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a real point there, and I can't possibly dismiss that. They are coming here. It is a reality that we must face. In facing that, however, we can be a lot more intelligent about how we do it. For instance, we have laws. We must audit people. We must know who we're bringing in. They're in intelligence services, of course, do background checks as best as they can. Of course, we realise that people come here and they don't have paperwork, and that's just sad reality. It's the nature of being a refugee. But we do have processes for asylum seekers, and we can't just take people in for a domestic environment, where, of course, as Mo said, we'll be under threat as well. I think the best compromise, although I really don't like it personally, is to put in temporary camps while we solve this problem. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of putting refugees under armed guard in a camp. But we must be pragmatic about this. Bringing it into our domestic environment, putting pressures on our public services, and all the rest. The instability that would cause. It's just we need to think about our own prerogatives as well as dealing with the problem.
Proposition?
Yeah. Go for it. I don't think. I think everyone would agree that a political solution to the Syrian conflict probably should happen. That there should, unless you're in Syria, but what I'm saying is that unless you're one of the belligerents in the war, what I'm saying is that I don't think anyone would disagree that we need to find a solution to this problem. But in the short, and as was mentioned, in the short term, there are still millions of people fleeing war and persecution. Are you, and this is what I don't understand, are you seriously going to tell me that when these people are trying to get into Europe, that you're going to turn around and say, you need to go back because we're going to try and find a political solution? Is that the argument that's being made here? Because that is ludicrous. And the opposition was making a lot of concerns, quite right concerns, about the practicalities of bringing refugees into Europe. I think that there are certain arguments to be had there. But is that impractical or moral to turn them back and say, no, go back to war and persecution until we can help to find a political solution? Quite simply ludicrous.
Clarify what I actually said.
I'm afraid that we're not going to do back and forth. I'm sorry. No, just because I don't like you.
I don't make them very often.
Sure, why not?
Jason, I may have misheard you on here, but I just want to clarify something.
Do you want to state your name for the
earlier in the debate, you said Mo and Harry, and then rather briefly they brought up practicalities versus moral obligation. Earlier on in the debate, you said, when questioned, that you said if someone's house was on fire, we wouldn't say like, oh, when can you turn to your own house? You didn't say that. And then at the very end, you brought up what I thought was a point of class, where you talked about the Turkish refugee who came up to you and said that he came here as a refugee but was without house, job, or any security. And you said, that is this the disgusting legacy that we want to leave? So earlier on in the debate, you said that we shouldn't worry about the practicalities, we should just take them on a moral basis. And at the end, you seem to decry that and say that was a poor legacy to leave. I may be wrong. Can you just clarify that?
No, I understand the confusion there, but basically what I was saying is, like, look at this. But like, we don't ask someone what is your long-term solution in a crisis. You help them in the crisis. And then what I meant by that man was, here's your man. He comes to this country. Obviously, there are practical solutions. It's better that he's here than in a war zone. But at the same time, like, he had become so angry and disillusioned with the government because his mum couldn't come here. That's another thing I forgot to mention. His mum couldn't come here. We had no support for him coming here. But like, he is better here than in a war zone, in my personal opinion. Because the Calais camps aren't a long-term solution. And you can't go back to Syria. People are talking about sending these people back to Syria. I don't know whether any of you have seen Syria recently, but there's very little to go back to in some situations, in a lot of the areas. So yeah, that's what I meant by that. I'm back clarified later.
Would you like to respond to that?
I'd just like to commend Jason Bonnesy for bringing up a case which, it does slightly undermine his own point, but it's an important case to hear about. But this is again the point I was making about direction of travel. So we had a more liberal Tory Prime Minister beforehand. Let's be under no illusions. Theresa May is significantly to the right. Okay, she's very anti-immigration. This man would have come to Northern Ireland before Theresa May, and once again, we're creating a place where if they came over, they would be vilified, they would not be supported, and to be honest with you, if anyone watched the Tory conference last Thursday, I'm not sure we should really have to put that on anyone.
And another question for the proposition, yourself, sir?
Hi,
would just like to state your name for the record?
Colin.
There's no question for the opposition.
Yes, the other side. I just asked one for
I thought that was a meh point because we already had. No.
We'll go for
Sorry. Yeah, go with your point. Sorry.
So yeah, the proposition was, and I think it's interesting just to note that Britain is the second biggest contributor to the humanitarian disaster, only behind the US. So whenever people do quote the two big brothers is doing nothing. I think that is ludicrous. There is more political reasons behind it. I would also like to think, like, you talk about UK's involvement, let's not remember there was them and Big Brother in World War II who came in from the West to defeat the tyranny in Europe, which caused all the disaster. And I will never defend the British military and many things they've done. Well, let's not forget some of the good things. Like, they're by far the biggest contributors in the whole of Europe to the humanitarian disaster. And secondly, I think it's an open, I don't really support this point, but it is an open point that the right make. And it is just the case that why is it that you made the example of going from like door to door after a fire. Why is it that the people, the refugees, are going 17 blocks away rather than the next door neighbour for refuge? Why is it that they're going through Turkey, they're going through Czech Republic? Why not stop in Germany? Germany's nice. Just look, why go the whole way to Calais and then just crossing the channel? I don't hold this point, but this is the point that far I make. Why go all that way and risk, as you say, that terminal in Europe? Why go all that way?
Yeah, I mean, well, sorry.
It was a question for the others.
Oh, I'm sorry, was that for you guys?
Was it?
What?
No, it was initially for you, but...
Okay,
well, we answered anyway.
Wow, okay. But, yeah, all I said was basically that these countries, the bordering countries, are already taking an awful lot. Like, you know, I mentioned those 10 developing countries that are taking over 80%. People do want to go to Europe for a number of reasons, and one of which I would hope, to be honest, is that we have a reputation of being tolerant and open. And I would hope that's one of the reasons why people come. But as I said, like, the border states of Syria are doing more than their fair share right now, and it's just proving what the Dublin regulation didn't foresee. So yeah.
Opposition want to respond? No.
Well, if anything, I'd like to take this opportunity to point out the straw man that you painted in my arguments. No one was suggesting refoulement at all. In fact, if we accept someone in, we have a legal obligation not to refoulement them. They're here in temporary accommodation until we can make it so that they can go back. That was the point.
In camps?
Well, I mean,
like in Calais.
there's an interesting thing, you know.
It's like, no, but I didn't answer the question, he answered the previous question.
In Angela Merkel, you know, she pointed out, she wanted to say Europe's doors are open, and I suppose it's to make up the past sins, but it seems that whenever Germany get involved in the world stage, it always ends up with cutting people in camps.
Moving on from that political development.
Wow.
Your new external convener, everyone. Anyway, question two. The question is now to the. I'm so confused. Opposition now, yeah.
No. Second proposition.
You in the back there.
Me?
Yes.
You go first.
You in the back.
Okay, I have a comment for you, the second speaker of I disagree with the statement because Angela Merkel was the only one who actually did something for the refugees. She let them in, and there are actually 800,000 refugees in Germany, not a million. And as far as I know from some of them, they want to go back to Syria or to their country, so they won't stay in Europe, and they need somewhere to go. And I think Angela Merkel is going to be re-elected, so...
That was a complete joke. It was just a wind up. But yeah, sure. It had no substance to that whatsoever.
Could we just get your name for the record as well, sir?
It's Sophia Lacour.
Thank you very much for that. Did the proposition want to be judge, jury, and executioner here?
Could I just come in on that point and say that I totally agree. I think that Angela Merkel has been a force for good when it comes to the refugee crisis, up until quite recently, when she has been forced to U-turn. And I know you mentioned about Angela Merkel, about her saying that Europe, about refugees should come to Europe, and that she has no right to speak on behalf of Europe. And you know that is a fair point. But I do think that European leaders, they do need to work together, and European leaders like Angela Merkel should be saying that we do have this moral obligation to accept. I mean, I'd much rather, you know, Angela Merkel saying it than us sitting here in a university arguing it. I think it's good that heads of state and heads of government are saying that we do have this obligation. But I do think that we do have to be careful in saying that and signing Angela Merkel in some kind of great light, in light of the recent U-turn. But I do mostly agree with everything that he said.
Oh, that's why did my voice have to break in? Anyway, any abstention, questions, comments on the motion itself? Mr. Muller, I see you're eager to stand up and represent.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I just wanted to explore a few ideas because I felt that there were some points that perhaps could have been mentioned. I mean, generally, this is an abstaining point, but it's sort of directed to both as well, both sides. Basically, there seemed to be a general consensus that this House should act, but the interesting thing was there was a dichotomy essentially between either accepting refugees or, what was the other option, finding a political solution, magically pulling out of what I would like to explore is just this question: with limited funds, what actions can we undertake that would produce the best consequences? Is using funds to integrate refugees, to bring them into our countries, the most effective ways of saving lives. Now, if we look at refugees coming, especially given the open invitation from some European leaders, what happened was it really sparked a huge migration, and many refugees on this route to Europe had to take a dangerous journey. So if we look at the number of deaths that occurred on this journey, would it perhaps be reasonable to say perhaps it would be better had we allocated funds to bring aid to them, to bring aid to the refugees in Jordan, in Turkey, in Libya, and instead of this open door policy that may have, I'm just asking you to consider, it may have resulted in dangerous, unnecessarily dangerous journeys and the death of many migrants. So, do I take that?
What does it first? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely agree with you in terms of, first of all, we do need to keep providing aid to Turkey, to Lebanon, to Jordan, but at the same time, they, especially Jordan, are relatively small countries. Like Lebanon has about the same population as Ireland, with 4 million, and they've got well over 1 million refugees. So it would be unfair to just say these three countries that they must take as many as possible. I think Europe is much bigger. Europe is a lot richer. Europe should take as many as we can as well. And in terms of the other point, the first point regarding, should we find a solution or should we take more refugees? I think, to be honest, you have to do both. I don't think there's going to be a solution in a long time because we've got, Putin as intense as possible on bombing Aleppo and other places to keep Assad in power. We've still got ISIS, who at the moment look like they're on the decline, but you could have another group that comes up. So I don't think it'll be a long time until there is a proper solution. So for the meantime, we just have to make sure that as many refugees from those countries as possible are protected, and I think the best place to do that would be Europe.
Here.
Right, Sam, would the opposition like to respond?
This isn't necessarily a direct rebuttal to what's been said. I was speaking from a purely emotional point of view. What we just heard kind of raised the question to me, why hasn't a political solution been found? The Syrian crisis didn't begin yesterday or even last year. It began, if memory serves, back in 2011, so at the end of the Arab Spring. So what have we been doing for the past 5 years? It sounds as though the world as a whole has been playing playing lyre while Syria burns, I accept that a political solution can't be found overnight. But what have the United States, Russia, what has everybody been doing for the last 5 years?
I think because we're actually quite pressed for time, we'll move on to the closing statements of our wonderful chairman this evening. If you'd like to come on up and address him from up here.
So yeah, I listened quite intently to everything you had to say. There were so many points made, and many of them, surprisingly, even on the side where the speakers themselves confess that they don't necessarily believe in their motions, were actually very effective points, many of them. So without going through everything that everyone said, I'll try to sum up. So I find that the proposing team, you ranged from emotive appeals to a slight of a reliance on facts at times. But
I would agree.
yeah, but that goes for everyone. So I thought that points that were well made by your team were that the rise in right-wing populism has distorted the debate across Europe, and it's been a big game changer. I really liked your point, Jason, about moral relativity in our societies and how we aspire to help those who've lost everything in our own society, so why wouldn't we extend that to others? That was a point effectively made. You also highlighted bias and racial profiling in the case of the Paris attacks, and how that was perhaps the same case in Germany. And that sort of effectively rebutted the point that was put to you, I thought. Points where I thought maybe merited more consideration where you had lots of clear examples of why you thought there was a moral duty, but you didn't really propose any solutions in the long term, which was kind of brought up by your side quite effectively. What are the long-term solutions? And again, well, sorry to bring it up again, but facts and figures. I think the thing is, facts and figures are great in debates, but only if they're not used as fillers. They have to be used with purpose and impact. So you've got to be careful about that. I think that's although there definitely is room for facts and figures, which let's see. So, and finally, I think you made a good point about, is this a temporary phenomenon or is it a protracted phenomenon? And so I think that's where you did address the long-term issue. On the other side, I thought that as a team, it was a real mixture of different types of approach to the question. I think you did link it through. There was a through thread, but it was at times a bit of a curve there. So you kind of ranged from concern and perhaps somewhat justifiable pessimism about our capacity as a society to help people, even people who are already here. It's something that is raised quite often, I think we all know. To rhetoric, which was very effective, but a little unnerving at points. And finally, a summary speech, which I thought was very personable. And I thought you flipped the argument well on its head about, that's where I stopped making notes on this page. I'll go back here. Yeah, you turned the argument very effectively on its head about should intervention be used instead of acceptance of refugees. I thought that was a valid point made by this slide. Let's see. And also, again, it's a controversial point, but it's a valid point. Ostracised communities can foster extremism, and that's something that wasn't really put to you, but it's something that your side of the argument also have to consider in the long run. Outside of debate, perhaps, but if we're thinking about the subject more broadly. Okay, I thought there was a point about, it being fashionable, and that the sort of popular attention that was given after Alan Kurdi was sort of an example of it's fashionable to help people, but there was no real justification of that. There was no real justification of it being a self-serving action. And let's see, Yeah, I think that's all really. But I think that both teams spoke incredibly effectively on the issue, particularly given that perhaps you don't agree with it. And it really just comes down to the overall impression that was left for all of you. So yeah, and I really hope I wasn't too biased.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank our guest chair and the Amnesty Society at QUB and in Northern Ireland in general for coming along and co-hosting this with us tonight. Before we go to a vote, I'd just like to give them another round of applause. And on that note, we will head to a vote. So this first vote is on your opinions prior to the debate having taken place this evening. If you were in favour of the motion before this evening, please raise your hands and say aye. Keep it quite high so we can count. Aye.
What was the motion again?
This House believes that European states have a moral duty to take refugees.
That's less than high, folks.
House minus one. 45.
I got 44. And who's against the motion? Yeah.
I got the last one.
Anyone who wants to abstain on the motion? Jane with that. Yep. Oh, right one. And this next vote is on, I want to say speaker performance, yeah, because that's what it's on. So if you thought the proposition spoke best tonight, they had the most convincing case, please raise your hands again and say aye.
Don't get yourself.
And those who thought the opposition spoke better tonight. And if you thought both sides spoke equally well or equally rubbish, please raise your hand. Say man.
Very well, but
that in what can only be described as a rather close vote, I believe the motion has passed. And because I'm an idiot and I have forgot to do 2 announcements at the start, before we all go off and have pints and more scintillating conversation and the like, the Irish Times competition is coming up. We have 2 team spots for that, which means we have space for 4 speakers. If anyone is interested in competing in that, the first round of that is on Saturday the 22nd, location TBC. So if you're interested in speaking of that, come speak to me or Rob at any point during the course of the evening. Also, our open competition where institutions from all over the UK send their teams to debate in the 2-day competition at Queen's University Belfast here. It's happening on the 29th, 30th of October. We have 3 team slots for that, which means we're looking for 6 speakers, yeah, because I can do metal well in my head. I should actually say 4 speakers because one of those teams is actually taken up even though they haven't registered yet. I believe you're one of them, but you haven't registered yet, so get on it.
What point did Mo advance in the Irish Times last year, Mr. President?
He it's quite impressive, apparently, yeah. He got to the semi-final, so very well done. The only other thing apart from that was, as part of the competition, it's kind of up to the society that's hosting the competition to provide crash for everyone who's competing. So if you'd like to open your doors to your very small craft elms, in the spirit of this motion, actually, you should accept destitute debaters from all across the world into your small flat and get drunk with them. So you're
if I may I say a few words very quickly before we all part?
On what matter?
On the matter of just how the arguments expressed are not necessarily the beliefs of the House, again, it is the household. And I have been deliberately abrasive, so my points for the sake of humour. But I don't want to make light of what this is a real serious issue and a real crisis. And I hope that this has shed some light on both arguments, which of course both do have some basis. And I just want to make that point quite clear.
Well, thank you very much for that clarification. I'd like to thank all of our speakers here and our chair and our co-host for what has been, I hope, a very informative debate, very respectful debate given the contentious issues at hand. So very well done to all involved. Another applause, and we'll head on to VAR.
Can I round them up for a photograph?